He will be talking to us about a survey on remote work. Oh, and I just learned, as Benjamin posted in the chat, that next week's Krista's talk will be lessons learned from 15 years in the metaverse. So excited to hear that as well. And while maybe Jose is sharing slides, one thing I wanted to mention as well is that we have a Kai workshop that we are hosting, Benjamin and myself and a bunch of other co-organizers. So Benjamin, maybe you can put in the chat the link to this Kai workshop. This is a great place for you to come and tell us and the community about your thoughts and positions on what it means to be present in a remote environment. And we're currently soliciting proposals for talks. So this is just a 2-page paper that you should write, a 2-page position paper, and put it in the submit it to the Kai workshop by February 25th. And you can find the link to it in the chat where Benjamin just posted. Great. So Jose, would you like to come?
Thanks for that introduction. I'm very happy to be here and talk to you all today about remote work. So yeah, why don't I get started? I have, I think, a good amount of material. So yeah, please feel free to interrupt or write in the chat as much as possible if you have questions. But yeah, I have a good amount of material. So I'll try to keep this at the 1-hour mark and skip stuff towards the end as necessary. So this is a paper on why working from home will stick, that is joint work with Nick Bloom at Stanford and Steve Davis at the University of Chicago. So kind of without further ado, kind of what do we do in this paper? We are asking 3 questions in the regarding kind of the shift to remote work that we've seen since the start of the pandemic. So how much working from home is there after the pandemic? What are the economic mechanisms that are supporting a persistent shift to working from home, like the one that it looks like we are seeing? And to the extent that there will be a persistent shift, what are the consequences of that? And then so I'm going to break out those consequences into kind of for 3 groups of people: for workers, for productivity, but also for managers, because it's kind of really changing the way the world works. And so what do we do in the paper? We've surveyed so far over 93,000 working age Americans who earned more than $10,000 in 2019, and we've been doing this on a monthly basis since 2020. So kind of each survey is a few thousand individuals, and so I'll say more about this later, but we are currently in the field now again with so this is kind of very much a data collection effort that is ongoing. We estimate that before the pandemic, something like 5% of full paid working days were being done from home. During the pandemic, it's kind of, we average across our full sample period, it's been closer to about 45%. And then we're projecting that it's going to be something like 26 or 27% as of the latest information that we have after the pandemic ends. And so I'll show you how we do this projection. As for reasons why working from home will partly stick, so here are some that I'm going to go through. I think the main thing to think about is that the pandemic created an opportunity for mass experimentation and learning with this new mode of work. So the technology for doing it was all there. Kind of Zoom existed in 2019, high-speed broadband internet existed. Kind of there was the technology was really there. We just hadn't kind of tried it, and the pandemic made us experiment and learn about how remote works. And as we've learned, there's been re-optimization by firms and workers who kind of realize, hey, this works. I don't have to go back to commuting 5 days a week in order to kind of do something meaningful. The second strand of what I'm going to try to convince you of is that because of this kind of mass experimentation, workers and firms have made big investments into being able to work from home effectively. And so this is these investments are going to stick around. So everybody who created kind of a nice home office, bought some furniture, etc., all of those investments are going to continue after the pandemic. And now that we all know how to use Zoom, kind of these investments in human capital, this learning is also going to enable us to continue doing some working from home after the pandemic. And then finally, kind of there's a bunch of changes in attitude. So there's less stigma associated with working from home. Worker preferences have shifted, and also there seems to be kind of a lingering fear of proximity to others. We see that less so in the past couple months, but still there's kind of a big fraction of the people who we survey who say, yeah, I'm not totally comfortable going into public spaces all the time. And yeah, so as for the consequences, here's basically what we find. We find that the main thing is that working from home is going to benefit higher earners by far the most. We are projecting that it's going to increase the productivity of work by something like 5%, and I'll go into how that works. But it's also going to come with significant managerial challenges. So managers are going to need to now manage a hybrid or remote workforce, and that is very different from managing a workforce that was totally in the office before the pandemic.
Jose, I just wanted to ask a question from the chat for you. So Nima Hakpana asks, so 26% means 26% of people work from home fully, or each person spends 26% of their time working from home?
So that means for the average person, they're going to work from home 26% of the full paid working day. But this average person is kind of a blend of many different types of people. So I'll show you a little bit in more detail what this looks like. But basically, there's about half of the population who simply cannot work from home. Say these are people who work in-person jobs. They're waiters, baristas, work in a manufacturing plant, and they have to be physically at work. Then for the other half of us who are mostly knowledge workers, you're going to see that the average person there is going to work from home about 2 to 3 days a week. There's going to be some people that are going to be fully remote. There's going to be some people who, even though they work a knowledge job, they're going to go back to the office 5 days a week. Yeah, so I think this gives you a better idea, but I'll show you some distributions to make this a little bit more concrete in a minute. Sorry, were there other questions before I move on? Great. So here's the roadmap of what I want to talk about today. So first, I want to talk about the survey and the methodology. Basically, where are we getting this data from? How are we dealing with representativeness, etc. Then I'll try to convince you that working from home will stick, so that we are going to see a persistent shift. Then I'll go into why it's going to stick, so delve a little bit more into the economic reasons for why we're seeing this persistent shift, and then finally end talking a little bit about the consequences. So let me start with the survey and the methodology. No. So we created a new survey of our own design that we've called the Survey of Working Arrangements and Attitudes. And so we've done at least 18 waves. I think I forgot to update that number. We're more close to like 21 or 22 waves that we've run over the internet using commercial survey providers. So what we do is we contract with a company that commercially sells this survey research to other businesses. And so basically what they do is they program a survey for us, and then they go to a market where they recruit as many respondents as possible from an aggregator that pulls from many different sources to try to get kind of a broad range of people, and then kind of invitations are sent to people who are in our broad kind of population of interest that I'm going to talk about in a second. So as of right now, we've collected more than 93,000 responses, and as I said, this is a monthly survey. We've been doing this basically every month since May 2020, and the last month that I have data for in this presentation is January 2022. But we are in the field right now collecting another survey, so you should think of this as really an ongoing data collection project. Maybe I'll give one note here, which is many of the slides that I have in this presentation are coming from the data for many of those slides stops in like October or November of last year, because that's just when I had that data. But for some of the more kind of time series oriented and to look at trends and how things are moving, I'm going to go all the way to January 2022. So the survey, what we want to capture are people who are living in the United States and who are working age, so they're between 20 and 64, and who earned at least $10,000 in 2019. So basically what we want to focus on are people who are closely attached to the labor market. And so that's why we have this earnings threshold right here. And so as you can imagine, when you kind of try to recruit people from these commercial internet surveys, they're not necessarily a representative population of the US. So what we do is we're going to reweight everything to match the current population survey, so kind of the gold standard Bureau of Labor Statistics and census survey by age, sex, education, and earnings. And so I'll show you basically how that changes the representativeness of the survey, how this reweighting works. Every survey has a bit more than 60 questions per wave, and then so we ask about standard things like demographics, earnings, hours worked, commuting time, spending. We also ask workers how much they're working from home during COVID, so basically how many days this week are you working from home? And then kind of some of the key questions about how much would you like to work from home after the pandemic, one, and two, how much is your employer planning for you to work from home after the pandemic? Okay, and then because this is also a survey of attitudes, we ask them about their experiences and perspectives working from home. Do you like it? Do you want to do more? What do you like? What do you not like? Are you efficient? Are you not efficient? Okay, and so here's just very briefly, methodologically, kind of what our survey responses look like against the CPS. And so you see basically we oversample materially higher earning and higher and people with more education. But then after we reweight to age to match the distribution of the population in terms of age, sex, education, and earnings, then we get something that is pretty representative. And so if we look even kind of at other dimensions like the industry of the current or most recent job or the census division, so this is the part of the country where you live, kind of after reweighting, we do a pretty good job of matching the distribution of people across industries and sets.
I'm sorry, I forgot. How did you solicit these survey respondents?
Yeah, so it's basically they are a commercial survey provider. So there's this is something that companies and people do. So people sign up to receive online surveys, and kind of depending on how you sign up, you can get things like airline miles or kind of credit for online games, or some people just get paid cash or Amazon gift cards. And so once you sign up for this, there are these aggregators that kind of pull from these different places. And so what our commercial survey provider does is they go to basically to this marketplace and they bid for the 5,000 responses that we need. Kind of because we're going through an aggregator, we get kind of people from as many sources as possible.
It's interesting that you're overweighting high income, because like I wouldn't spend my time doing that for an Amazon gift card.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And so basically what I gather is that a lot of people get, for example, airline miles for doing these sorts of surveys. Points on loyalty, things like that. So I think a lot of the people who are higher income are actually bidding for something like that where kind of the value to them is actually much higher than the value to us or to the person who ends up ultimately paying them those airline miles, say. But yeah, that's interesting. But we find it consistent. Other questions? And so one last note about the surveys is that kind of as we've gathered more data and we put out results, so we built this website called wfhresearch.com, where you can find kind of a bunch of stuff on kind of results that we've put out. So we have a monthly newsletter. We put out results on a monthly basis, and you can also find kind of the papers and all of the nerdy stuff. And kind of all of the questions that we've ever asked in the survey are also under the methodology tab. So I encourage you, if you're interested, to go check that out. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about how much working from home we expect to see after the pandemic. So during COVID, we've seen something like 10 to 12 times the amount of working from home that we used to see before the pandemic. So how do we get to this number? Before COVID, we estimate that something like 5%, 4.8% of full paid working days were being done from home. And so we estimate this off of the American Time Use Survey, which is a survey, again, run by the BLS, where they basically go and ask people, how did you spend your day? And this was done during 2017 and 2018, and they actually had a specific module on the amount of working from home. And so kind of we have a bunch of detailed tabulated data here. So 14.7% of workers had full paid days at home, and really kind of when we think of working from home, and as academic, we really want to capture the people who are having these full paid days at home. So not kind of think about the investment banker or the McKinsey consultant who does email at home at the beginning and at the end of the day. No, we want kind of people who have full days at home. Among those who had full days at home, only about half of them regularly had more than full working from home days per week. Okay, so basically, the picture is that before the pandemic, this was quite rare, even though kind of potentially in certain occupations, like maybe in the tech industry, it might have been significantly more common. And by the way, there's this kind of a parallel paper by Davis, Gent, and Gregory, who used the micro data from the American Time Use Survey, and they arrived at basically the same number as us. During COVID, as we've pooled the May 2020 to January 22 waves, working from home, we estimate amounts on average to something like 44.9, 45% of full paid working days. So this is something like 10 times what we saw relative to before the pandemic. And if we look at May 2020, when kind of lockdowns were still very much a thing, they were starting to get relaxed, but kind of this was still very close to the peak of kind of the lockdown stage of the pandemic, as many as 60% of full paid working days were being done from home. So that's something like 12 times what we saw before the pandemic. Okay. Now, for after the pandemic, we've relied on this question since kind of we started doing the survey, essentially. So we've actually changed the wording a little bit recently. So for a long time, the question read, after COVID in 2022 and later, how often is your employer planning for you to work full days at home? With the answers ranging from never, once or twice a month, all the way to 5 or more days a week, or my employer has not discussed this, or I have no employer. And so basically what we've changed recently is now, instead of saying in 2022 and later, since we are already in 2022, we ask people kind of after the pandemic ends. So kind of once basically COVID is endemic and no longer worry about it kind of on a daily basis, what is your employer planning? And so let me show you a little bit kind of what these plans look like in the fall of 2021. So a couple of things. So here I've sorted people into two groups. So people who are, as of fall 2021, so a couple of months ago, who were working from home at least 1 day a week. And so that's the chart on the left. And you can see kind of what the distribution of plans looks like there. Basically, there's a lot of variation here. As many as a quarter of people say that they're going to be fully remote, but kind of that's very much not the median person. The median person is going to be somewhere between 2 and 3 days a week, conditional on working from home
on basically being able to working from home and doing it in fall 2021. So basically you did not work at Goldman Sachs and you were not forced to come back early on. Then if you look at the figure on the right, those are the people who in fall 2021 are not doing any working from home currently. And so you see basically they're all saying, I don't plan to do it after the pandemic and so on. Sorry, lots of stuff in the chat if there's a question that I can address. No?
I think people are still a bit confused about whether, when you say there's like, you know, in the previous slide when you were saying that during the pandemic 49% or whatever of people, there was 49% of working from home, whether that's 49% of the people worked fully from home or 40, like everybody worked half their days from home. And I guess it's a distribution, of course, but like.
So it is a distribution, but basically during the pandemic, what we've seen is that predominantly people are either fully at work or fully at home. There's a few people who are in the middle, especially let's say up until summer 2021, kind of it's really basically a binary decision. And a few, in the past few recent months, we've started to see some more people saying that I'm going into the office half days or something like that. So yeah, you kind of, for all intents and purposes, you might think of this as 44% of the people in our sample saying I am 100% remote.
I guess another curious thing for me is the sort of what jobs were being done must have changed a lot during the pandemic. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison to look at the 5% and the 45% because restaurant workers were just out of work at the beginning, at least. And
yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So part of why this number is so high is not because there were many more people doing knowledge jobs working from home in May 2020 than there are now. It's more so because many of the people who just can't work from home weren't working at all, and so they were not adding any full paid working days. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Kind of, I don't know off the top of my head how much of the variation comes from this, let's call it participation margin, but that my sense is that is driving a significant amount of kind of what is going on with this number here. I should say that for most of 2021, this has been pretty stable. So it's been kind of trending down very slightly, but this month-to-month number. So I think I did not update this time series, but I can show you what this time series looks like. So yeah, kind of in 2020, there's this big spike here when basically during lockdowns people were not working. Then there's a jump in late 2020, early 2021 when we had kind of that really bad wave, or say after the presidential election, for example. And then kind of for most of 2021, it's sort of trended down. So yeah, I could add a couple more dots here, but it's been fairly stable within this range since then. Okay, so again, going back to, this is our question about future plans. How are we going to put a number to this question? So basically, we're going to take this into account, but more than that, we're going to do the following. So we're going to assign 0 working days at home post-COVID to respondents who say that they are never going to do it, or they're going to do it about once or twice per month, just to keep things simple. And so we're trying to be conservative in this projection. So basically when people say, my employer has not discussed this matter with me or announced a policy about it, we are going to say, you know what, let's be conservative and say, you're not going to work from home at all. And so the reason for this is look, if you can't work from home, your employer is probably not going to talk to you about it. It turns out there's a significant number of people right here, so about 1 out of every 6 people who are currently working from home, say in fall 2021, say my employer hasn't really given me a clear plan about this. And so kind of starting with the most recent survey wave that I have data for, basically, if you are in this group right here, in this 16.6%, we're going to give you the average for other workers who are currently working from home. And yeah, if you say that your employer has not given you clear plans, but you are not currently working from home as of fall 2021 or early 2022, we're going to assume that you're just not going to do it either. Okay? And for the other choices, basically, we're going to assume that people work a 5-day work week. So if they say 1 day per week, we're going to give them 20%. If they say 2 days per week, we're going to give them 40%. And so after kind of doing these numerical assignments, we end up with a number on how much working from home we expect to have after the pandemic. And we can do this in every month. And so this is basically what the trend looks like. So the big dashed gray line is what this trend looks like for all workers. So in 2020, it kind of goes up, kind of goes down, but no clear trend. Since the start of 2021, basically this number has been going up. And actually, if we look at workers who are able to work from home, and so this is as revealed by them having ever worked from home during the pandemic, then again, in 2020, it's kind of flat. And then in 2021, it just starts increasing. And so for workers who can work from home, we now expect them to spend on average something like 2.2 days at home. No, 2.1 days at home after the pandemic. For if we look at the entire population, which again, kind of going back to the earlier question, half of people can't work from home at all. It's closer to about 1.4 days, or so 26-27% of full paid working days. And yeah, and I think this picture also goes to the question of how is this distributed, or what does this look like? So here's basically how the responses to our question have evolved over time. And so you can see kind of consistently just a little bit less than half of all workers say that they're going to not work from home at all after the pandemic. And this, again, goes to my comment that there's about half of the working age population who are working full-time who just can't work from home because they're waiters, they work in a manufacturing plant, they need to be physically at work. Similarly, the proportion who say that they're going to be fully remote has been pretty stable across surveys. So, I mean, obviously there's a little bit of noise from month to month, but this is pretty stable. What we've really seen since the beginning of 2021 is that the fraction of people who say, my employer has not given me a clear plan has shrunk, largely speaking. And in its place, the fraction of people who say that I'm going to be in hybrid mode has increased kind of as much as by 50% or so during the course of 2021. Okay. And so a lot of the increase in these graphs is coming from the red kind of area here shrinking down, because so remember for we assign 0 working from home days if you say your employer has not given you clear plans. And so as this has shrunk and more of those people have kind of moved to say my employer now wants me to work from home a couple of days a week, that's about 50% of the increase that we've seen during 2021 is coming from kind of going from no clear plans to some plans for working from home after that.
There's some questions in the chat about why January 2022 is a jump up in no clear plans from employer. Having an employer of Microsoft, I think I understand, but I don't know if you have a comment about that.
I don't have a clear view on this. I think it's mostly noise, and perhaps the people who are signing up to do surveys right after they've done New Year's resolutions and stuff like that is a little bit different than in another month. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't read too much into this yet. And I should say, kind of these trend lines that I'm showing you right here are, I mean, they're moving averages precisely because we want to kind of average out any noise across kind of potential surveys. Right. And yes, I agree that January 21 is different from February 21. We noticed that a while ago, and so again, I'm not reading too much into what happened in last month's survey. In a couple of days, I might be able to tell you what will happen in February of 2022. So and hopefully it'll look like a blip rather than something else. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about why working from home will stick. And so I want to go through a few reasons, but I think, as I said at the beginning, the most important one is forced experimentation and learning brought on by the pandemic that is going to help us overcome inertia. So we can illustrate this with the following question that we've been asking for pretty much every month since we started the survey. So when the question reads, compared to your expectations before COVID, how has working from home turned out for you in terms of productivity and efficiency? And so consistently what we get is that a majority of people say that working from home has turned out better than they expected. So this is something like between 60 and 70% of people say that it's gone better than they expected. And so what does this have to do with experimentation and learning? Well, again, the technology enabling working from home existed before the pandemic. We just had never tried it out. And so once we locked down and all were forced to do it together, we were forced to learn how it works and learn how it works while other people are also learning about it. And in this experience, we've come out with basically this productivity surprise that is on average positive. Yeah, there's a few people who say, a small number who say that it's been hugely worse, for example. But there's basically two effects going on here. So the payoffs of working from home are clearly very high for some people, right? And so we posit that these people are going to stick with working from home because it just works really well for them. But also, if you look at the picture, it's pretty clear that we had pessimistic priors about working from home before we could try it out during the pandemic. And so kind of the forcing event of the pandemic that forced us to learn about our payoffs while working from home has kind of really changed the way we view working from home and led us to re-optimize. And so I think there's a couple of questions in the chat, and whoops, this is not the figure I wanted. But basically what we find is that the more positive you feel the working from home experience has been, the more you want to do it and the more your employer wants to do it. And so that's evidence that the people are kind of reacting to this productivity surprise and re-optimizing in response to it. Yeah.
Do you have any data about how this turned out relative to, like, and so this is relative to expectations, which means maybe I thought it was going to be absolutely awful and it wasn't, but it still might be way worse than working at work.
Yeah, I'll show you that. We also find that people are on average positive about the efficiency of working from home compared to the office. And I mean, I'll show you that there's two things going on there. One is kind of people feel more efficient, but also the amount of time we save on commuting actually has a big impact on the potential efficiency of working from home. So
I'll there's another question in the chat from Ian Stark. Having everyone else work from home might have helped things turn out better than expected too, which I guess, last week's talk, which you probably missed, was about hybrid meetings. And so I'm curious how much that plays into, like, did you break this down by people that were kind of like partially at work, like, and see if that changed things, because those people might be in more hybrid meetings?
Yeah, I don't think we've done that, and then that's partly because kind of during most of the pandemic, people have been typically in binary, either fully at work or fully at home. But so I think that's a huge issue, and so it looks like we are headed towards a primordially hybrid world, and kind of some of the managerial challenges that have to do with kind of managing a hybrid workforce is exactly that. How do you manage hybrid meetings and things like that? And so kind of I can say more about this probably after the talk, but basically when we talk to companies with my co-authors, what we typically recommend is that hybrid workplaces kind of designate days when people come to the office to meet in person, and then kind of allocate the individual work time to other days, so that to kind of maximize the benefits of being at work when you are at work, and maximize the benefits of being at home when you are at home. But yeah, no, I think that's a huge issue, and I think it's hard to get much about this question, at least for much of 2021, when people were kind of still either fully remote or fully at work.
And you can feel free to defer this to later, but Benjamin Pierce asks, is there anything you can say about how work from home affects the social aspects of work?
That's a good question. So we have a few questions out in the field right now asking basically, do you want to come to work when your colleagues come to work, and why? How important is the social aspect? So I don't have data for that yet, but we should have data on that in a month or two. Okay, let me move on. So again, reason number one why working from home is going to stick is this experimentation and learning leading to re-optimization. The second reason is investments enabling working from home. So we estimate that investment into working from home adds up to 0.7% of GDP. And so this is coming from two sources in our data. So first is human capital investment. So we asked our workers, how many hours have you invested in learning how to work from home effectively? So for example, learning how to use video conferencing software, and there the average worker has spent something like 15 hours. And so that we can value that at their hourly wage rate and get an estimate for how much, for the quantity of investment into human capital. And we also asked them, how much money have you and your employer invested in equipment or infrastructure to help you work from home effectively? So on computers, on a better internet connection, on an extra iPad, et cetera, et cetera. And so there the average is also fairly substantial, $500 to $600. Okay, and so together these two add up to a non-trivial 0.7% of GDP by our estimates. What you should also think about is that additionally, firms have made investments on business premises. And so actually, we see this in the macro time series. So here, there's two lines. There's gross private domestic investment, and is the dashed blue line. And so you see with both of them are normalized to 100 in 2019 Q3. You see the investment drops during the pandemic recession, and then it kind of recovers. But if you look at private fixed investment into information processing equipment and software, so basically these are businesses investing in kind of cloud computing infrastructure, in computers for their staff, and so on and so forth, that has risen during the pandemic. So this is, and this business investment is all in addition to what we find. And kind of just to go back to why do we think these investments are such an important reason why working from home will stick, is basically now that you have your home office set up, now that your company knows how to run Microsoft Teams and kind of Zoom and all of that, those facilities are going to remain, and you're going to still be able to use them and want to use them in the future. The third reason is, and so here I'm delving into kind of the fact that attitudes have shifted. And so this is the graph that I wasn't supposed to show you before, but here it is again. Workers want to work something like 74%, want to work from home 74% more often than their employers are planning. So after COVID in 2022 and later, how often would you like to have paid work days at home? So this is kind of goes hand in hand with the question about how much is your employer planning. This is how much would you like to have paid work days at home. And you see this is much higher for what workers want in the solid black line than what employers are planning. So there's a lot of demand for workers, from workers for working from home. And given that we're in a kind of pretty tight labor market right now, we think that this is going to start breaking in, or that part of the increase in what employers are planning is coming precisely from workers demanding it. Basically, workers they know that working from home can work at least part of the time, and so they're not just going to take being asked to go into the office 5 days a week And so you kind of see this with investment bankers who got asked to come back to the office last summer, but then basically what the investment banks did was they raised everybody's salary by 30%. So yeah, if you're not willing to offer working from home, as an employer, you're gonna have to pay for it. And actually what we see is that workers say they're willing to search for a different job or quit outright if they're forced back full time. So since last summer, I think June, we've been asking, how would you respond if your employer announced that all employees must return to the worksite 5 days a week starting the month after next? And basically, so some 60% of people say that they would comply and return, but adding up the people who would quit outright or who would return but start looking for a working from home job, that amounts to kind of over 40% of people who are able to work from home. Okay. Keeping on with the attitudes, something else that has changed is the stigma associated with working from home has diminished. So if you think back to before the pandemic, something like, or most people viewed working from home as shirking from home or shopping from couch, et cetera, et cetera. This, I think, really has shifted. And again, this is a product of all us having had to work from home kind of all together at the same time. So we've been asking for a while now, since the COVID pandemic began, how have perceptions about working from home changed among people you know? And what we see is, again, a majority of people say that things have improved. Only a small number of people say that perceptions about working from home have gotten worse. And we think this is a particularly important mechanism because the more kind of society views working from home as a positive, the more you're going to be willing to ask for it as an employee, and the more your employer is going to be kind of happy to give it to you. So this is also self-reinforcing because the more people do it, the more positively society views it, and that encourages even more working from home. And the last attitudinal change that I want to go through is that there seem to be persistent fears of social proximity. And so I'll be upfront. This figure right here goes up until October 2021, and things have gotten a little bit kind of more positive in recent months. So let me just take you through what this is saying. We've been asking several versions of this question. Again, we've changed the wording as the pandemic has evolved and vaccines have become available and so on. But the gist of the question asks, once the pandemic has ended, which of the following would best fit your views on social distancing? Would you completely return to your pre-COVID activities? Would you return to most of your pre-COVID activities, but for example, avoid Ubers and crowded elevators and a skyscraper? Would you return partially to your COVID activities, say avoiding, for example, dining out and kind of other indoor gatherings, or would you just not return to your pre-COVID activities? And kind of consistently what we find is that there's really a minority of people who say that they would completely kind of go back to the way things were in 2019. So in between August and October of last year, it was 34%. This number is a little bit higher now, so it's just above 40%, but still it's a minority of people who say that they would just kind of return to the way things were. So I see a question in the chat. Is it once the pandemic has ended or once most people are vaccinated? So for a while we asked this question and the wording was once most people are vaccinated. Eventually we changed this wording to once the pandemic has ended because it became clear that at least in the United States that kind of we were never going to have everybody vaccinated. And so that was kind of not the best way to frame the question. We did not find that the responses changed particularly once we changed that wording. Kind of, I think, the gist of the question is looking forward to kind of when you don't have to worry about COVID on a daily basis. What do you think you're going to do? And so this is just a recap of the mechanisms for why we think working from home is going to stick. There's one that I didn't talk about, which is technical change, and so maybe why don't I click on this? So my co-authors with Yulia Chestkova worked on a short paper where they showed that the share of working from home patents as a percent of all patent applications basically just explodes after the pandemic starts in February 2020. And so what is this? This is indicating that basically once working from home becomes a big thing, technical change gets redirected in the direction of enabling working from home and making it better. And so again, this is kind of a self-reinforcing mechanism in this, to the extent that the better working from home works, the more people do it, and the more demand there is for innovations to make it work. And so yeah, I thought since a lot of the audience here is fairly technology related, this is another kind of more technology related reason why we should expect working from home to stick. It's getting better.
Heads up that you might want to wrap up in 2 to 5 minutes to leave time for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me talk a little bit about the consequences. I'll probably skip the consequences for managers, and we can discuss about kind of managing a remote workforce afterwards if people are interested. So let me talk a little bit about workers and productivity. So let's start with workers. What you should have in your mind is that working from home is a perk. So after COVID in 2022 and later, people say that they are positive. They view working from home as a benefit or extra pay, more so than they view it negatively. And so yeah, here's the distribution of kind of how much do you value it. The problem is that it's going to be a perk that is very unevenly distributed. So here the black circles show how much people want to work from home for every bucket of annual earnings that we have in the survey. The red triangles instead show how much employers are planning for workers to work from home after the pandemic. And you see basically everybody wants to work from home about 2 days a week, and this rises a little bit with earnings. But once we go to employer plans, it's clear that the only people who are really going to get to work from home as close to as much as they want are people who are earning more than $150,000 to $200,000 a year. So this is a perk that is very unevenly distributed. And the second thing is most people, or not most people, a large fraction of people, 42%, say that they are more efficient while working from home than they were before when they were at the office. Yeah, and so here's the distribution. Here, a big fraction of people say it's about the same, but on balance, many more people say that that it's better at home than those who say that it's worse at home. And this number has actually been rising over time. So kind of this looks kind of like a J curve where people sort of in 2020 have to learn about how to work from home effectively. But once you start learning kind of in 2021, we see these numbers rising and rising. And kind of this is even after we control for who is working from home, for kind of their education, their income, et cetera, et cetera. And what we find is that a bunch of this is coming from commuting time savings. So people say, yeah, kind of 86% of people say that part of why they're more efficient at home is I don't have to sit in my car or in public transit for 40 minutes back and forth. And so actually, just to wrap up, we estimate that the shift of working from home could raise productivity by something like 5% on an earnings weighted basis. So this is huge for the U.S. economy. This is something like worth 2 years of economic growth that we're going to get sort of permanently in terms of efficiency. And yeah, the 40 to 60% of these gains may come from just saving time from commute. If we instead ignore those commuting time savings, we get a much more modest number, something like 1.2%. So yeah, our full 5% projection accounts for commuting time savings, for kind of the fact that you are just more efficient, say it's quieter at home than at the office, and for basically how much we expect people are going to work from home after the pandemic. Okay, let me leave it there and skip the managerial implications. So what have we seen in this data gathering exercise, where working from home days are going to go from something like 5% pre-COVID to about 45% during, and then 26% after the pandemic, based on some of the most recent survey estimates. I went through a bunch of different reasons why we believe that are supporting this persistent shift to working from home. And as for consequences, kind of the two big ones that I went through are, this really benefits only a fraction of workers, but we expect it to raise productivity across the board. And we expect, and I can talk about this more if people are interested, that it's going to bring significant challenges to managing a hybrid or a remote workforce. So let me leave it there.
Much. That was very fascinating and fairly convincing, in my opinion, that there's going to be quite a lot of remote work post-pandemic, which I guess matches my intuition, but it's nice to see some data backing that up. I think we can take some time for questions now. If people would like to ask questions verbally, you can always do so by navigating your avatar to a microphone. And there's some emoticon claps